Welcome to Camp Code, a podcast brought to you by Go Camp Pro. We have created and are dedicated to this podcast because we believe that staff training is one of, if not the most important part of your job as a camp director. Staff training is what prepares your staff to care for their campers, to feel confident in their skills, to do their jobs to the best of their ability, and to learn along the way. A well thought out and intentional staff training will help you in more ways than you can imagine, and we need to help each other bring our very best. My name is Ruby Compton. I'm the Chief Exploration Officer for Ruby Outdoors in Western North Carolina, and I work to support camp directors in the area and across the world because working in camp is a hard job. And you may notice that today it's just me. Beth and Gabs are continuing on with their, full-time camp work and the things that they do, but we have a really special guest today. So our topic today is training the transition from campers to staff. And I am so excited for our guest today. We have Dan Davis with us, and he's a director here in the Western North Carolina area, but I'm gonna let him tell a little bit more about himself. So Dan, go ahead.
Excellent. Thanks, Ruby. I'm, as you said, Dan. I've been a camp director professionally for the last 25 years, started in camping back in '83. And where my passion lies now is to watch folks within transition. And particularly this camper to staff transition and how they grapple with the challenges of those transitions, the fun you can have as a mentor and as a director, and helping these folks, move from somebody who's being served to serve. And so that, and now I'm doing more work working with parents as they transition and folks transition into college. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. And so today's podcast is going to be a little bit more of an interview format than we typically do, but there's going to be some juicy stuff shared. So I hope you all will stick with it and hear some of the cool stuff that Dan has to say. I've been really excited to get to work with him over the last month or so as he's been starting some new projects, and because he's been a big mentor of mine in a lot of ways in the industry. And so I'm just so excited for him to share some expertise with you all today. So we're going to start off with the question, Dan, what challenges have you seen that folks experience as they transition from campers to staff?
I think the biggest challenge is we serve our campers. We're so good at camps at serving our campers, making sure their needs are met. I think that's just in our DNA. To the way we greet them and the hip hip hooray and how we serve them food, to how we tuck them into bed at night. And moving from that to having to work hard is incredibly difficult. Well, just change in general is very, very difficult in life. And I think this is the big one, especially in late adolescence, where you're trying to really define yourself and you come to camp and the way things were, they're no longer. Learning how to work a long day, which camp work is a long day. The camp can be draining. It also demands excellence. Another thing that camps are good at is demanding excellence out of all of our staff. And it is really difficult for a 17, 18-year-old to have produced a lot of resiliency and a lot of determination. And so that's the biggest change. The language that we use is they haven't yet learned that it's not about them anymore. And so they come to camp that they've beloved, that have focused on them, and suddenly their director tells them, oh, it's not about you anymore. That's really tough news.
For sure. And what sort of reactions do you see? Because I'm assuming that's something you are essentially telling the campers that are transitioning to that staff role. What reactions do those folks give you?
Typically, the young folks go to whatever has worked for them before. And I think it's important to understand at that point they aren't creating a new system to try to avoid pain. It's well established. So what we see more than any is that we see whining. This is too hard, or when am I going to get my needs met, or can I please have my cell phone back, to just some anger. And, one of the funny story, especially with the 17-year-olds in transition, is they tend to unionize. And so a group of old campers who are frustrated with the amount of work will unionize, I call it, and they'll come to me with a list of complaints. And it's a wonderful opportunity to help them grow. And they'll say something like, camp's no longer fun for us. And it gives, the mentor and the director a really good chance to walk with these folks as they learn to work. So it's a lot of frustration. Some folks who have not found their voice yet, it can be stressful. It can be anxiety causing. This is where it takes really mature leadership to not get too hooked by any of those reactions. They're just the next thing on your list on how you guide this young person. So it's really important to see the difficulties when transition is just part of this person's journey and not some kind of crazy thing that's happening.
Oh, I love that. And I'm so glad you addressed that piece, because I can imagine a lot of folks who potentially don't have as much experience as you, if they see campers or young staff unionizing, like that is a fear-inducing moment. So where did you learn to take that in stride, lean into it, walk alongside them?
Ooh, after a whole lot of failure. A whole lot of those millennials.
Of course.
And one thing you can check in, as you're directing, is when you're whining like that. Oh, those people. That's the time to take a step back. There's no good comes from that at all. And so I learned that from a lot of failure and a lot of wasting time, and a lot of what I think we can do as inexperienced directors. Is we end up shaming the folks we're trying to teach not to be ashamed. And, how dare you not work like that? And so you have to start with what's your goal in mind, and that is to grow these young people so they can be this dynamic workforce for you. I mean, that's the end all of any director's job, is you want to run an outstanding camp. Here are your people that are going to do that for you. And so how do you best, a word that I think is really important is, how do we empower these people? As a director, people should walk away from you with more power than they came with. And so that's what kind of helps me have a compass setting, because I've done those failing things or those shaming things of, I can't believe you're not working like this. Now I'm able to say, oh, of course, change is hard. And so it takes taking a step back and not getting hooked by these folks. Also, of course, having dynamic training and having a senior leadership staff that knows the same methodology is huge. But that core question of how did I learn it? It came from kind of getting folks to do things by manipulating instead of empowering them.
Oh, so good. Such good nuggets there. Oh my gosh. My mind is already blown. This is great. Well, Dan, you've been in the camping industry for a little while. How have you seen the challenges with transitioning campers to staff change over your camp career? Has it changed?
It has, and you have to be really careful here. Any of us with, some experience, it's so tempting the old back in my day, 5 miles uphill both ways to school.
Yeah.
That's funny to laugh at. There's zero truth in it. And so the biggest thing I've seen, and at least this is true in the young folks that I have worked with, is less folks get jobs early. And so it used to be for years, this is certainly true, is that we had kids that when they were 14, 15, 16, they were just really eager to get a job and start earning some money. They had to put gas in their car, and, they had to get some money to pay for going out on a date or getting clothes they need. I've really watched that change. And so a lot of folks that we're working for, we are their first boss, and we are their first job. And so that's a huge challenge. And so they're learning things for the first time. And so that's why I think, besides kind of shifting your training to not only being clear, but being gentle and kind at first, but that's been a big change. You think about the difference of getting a person who's never had a job before to a young person who's 17 and has worked for Chick-fil-A for the last year. That
Sure.
is such a radical different human being. So I'm always looking for folks who have already had that first job, but also I want to grow my campers into, great whole people. And so we say yes to a lot of folks who have not worked yet.
So I love this idea of approaching it with kindness and gentleness. Can you tell me what that looks like maybe in the hiring process, or when those folks are first getting to camp for staff training and eyes are wide and they're realizing, wow, this is really different from what I thought it was going to be?
Yes, it goes back to that notion, does everybody feel powerful enough to do their job and to find their voice? And so one of the things that we need to be looking for is what is going on in that person's head and heart. And especially when they're coming to camp for the first time or for the first time in a new role. And this is easy to get in touch with because we all feel this. We all feel when we're kind of misplaced in what we do in stress, and we're never best when we're stressed. I think everybody coming to camp the first day is probably feeling some degree of stress. And so I think an easy startup is nice. I think even though the noise that camp brings, to also find some quiet time for folks to be able to navigate. And then on that first day, to have senior staff to be able to check in with every staff member, and I mean one-on-one, how are you doing? Just to let them know that they're seen, that somebody's going to care for them, they can come to you with anything. And also to let them know, listen, we want your true self, not your crazy self. And so I think the really important about onboarding is to for in some ways it not to be drinking from the fire hose. And gosh, that's difficult. They've got so much to learn in such a short period of time, culture and skills and intentionality. But as much as we can see them, the other thing that really helps in that conversation is then, let's say the staff member is Jim. I start to know how Jim ticks and how he works and what inspires him, what empowers him, and what shuts him down. Not only does that put me in a position to mentor him well, it also puts me in a position throughout the summer as evaluations to be able to know, okay, you were in this situation where things got very stressful. Of course you reacted that way. I knew you would, and maybe we can make different choices.
Right on. Yeah, and this idea that, man, like camp directors can seem like Jedis if they have almost studied their staff enough to be able to anticipate some of the moves that are going to happen and the reactions that are going to happen and almost be a step or two ahead of them. That's pro level stuff right there.
Well, I agree. And it's also, maybe this comes from being old in this industry, but it's also one of the fascinating things of the job of being able to kind of get to know people well, help them get to know themselves well. Wow, it is just really exciting. For those days as you become a director and the blob's no longer interesting. This
sure.
kind of human development is.
Oh, I love that. That's great. Well, I'm curious to know, Dan, with all the intentionality that I've seen you put into programming and your staff and your camp community, is there anything that you're doing with campers to start to prepare them for making that transition from campers to staff? Is there anything you're talking about or activities they're doing to start to plant that seed?
Yes, I will say in our program, developmentally, we're trying to make each year, some would say more challenging. In some ways, we're just trying to make it more complex. And so kind of without kind of any kind of lecture or talking to the folks, each year you come back to camp, your cabin assignment is further away from the dining hall. It's further away from the waterfront, kind of the central part of our camp. It's a pretty big property. And so just by that, they have to walk farther to get to what they want. The way we do our council ring program, which is our initiatory program, gets more complex each year. Even the little guys at our camp have bathrooms in the cabins. And once you get 11 or 12, that is no longer the case. So even those simple things get a little more complex. The way we teach our camp programs are different from 9 and 10, 11, 12, and then 13 through 16. We are really focused on different teachings. When they get to the 13, 14, 15, that's when we start some training around the hero's journey. And if you're familiar, that's a whole nother podcast, conversation, weekend retreat. But the
For
core
sure.
to that is just part of life is challenge, and that you meet it head on, you succeed, you fail, and then here comes the next challenge. And so they start to get a sense, as much as you can get a sense at 14, 15, 16 of, there are going to be some really hard things consistently in my life. And the last thing I would do is run from them. So I call that a prophetic voice. You're going ahead and you're telling these guys what's going to happen. Our 15 and 16-year-olds, it's almost warning. Maybe that is too strong, but it is hey, when you come back, if you come back to work as staff, this is going to be a big deal, and you're going to have to give your life in a different way, and it's going to be hard. And so that first week of camp, most of them are just having a blast. But when things get difficult or complex, at least they have the benefit of, they can't say, nobody told me this was going to be like this. They're going to go, of course it's going to be like this. And that's not going to make it easy, but it's going to make it familiar. And that really, really helps. The other thing we do is our interviews are fairly challenging. And I think that's the way to do a good interview, is to have a really good balance of, we're going to see you, you're going to be part of our family, and then also say this family has significant challenges and boundaries for you. And it's going to be inspiring work, but it's going to be hard work. We're fans on, during an interview, if a guy is clearly he's not showing up like you're going to need him to show up, we'll stop the interview and make a challenge right there. And we'll say, let's use Jim again. Jim, everything that has happened in this interview so far, there's no way you're going to get this job. Let me tell you why. And it may be something like, you weren't able to look me in the eye. You haven't smiled yet. And you may be stressed. I understand that. But this is a job where you're going to have to be positive, and you're going to have to be able to look people in the eye. Would you like to start the interview over? And there will be this pause. He's not expecting this. And oftentimes they'll go, yeah, I'd like another chance. And we do the whole thing over. I'll send them outside the room. We'll come back in and we'll have a restart. Number one, if the guy comes back in, here you've got a guy who's willing to learn. This is the kind of guy you want to work with. So he's passed a huge test there, and that you've given him a serious critique. And this guy has said, I'm up to that critique. It's a huge thing. And then we, start the interview again, and he has the skills or he doesn't, but boy, does it show a lot. Here's a guy that's going to be able to take critique. And of course, what we do as soon as we come back in, the first thing he receives is a blessing. Man, this kind of energy, Jim, this is going to serve you well the rest of your life. And so I feel that sets him up really well. This guy, if we offer him a contract and he says yes to it, this is the type of person we want to work with.
So cool. And so rare, I feel like, in the world that we live in. We live in a world of call out and cancel culture. And it's like you trip up and then suddenly, you're out. That's it. You're done. You're voted off the island. And so how cool that you are showing staff that compassion and that teaching. And I think, again, that goes back to that kindness and leaning in and understanding that this may be their first job interview they've ever done. And we have a real opportunity to teach right there. Would you agree with that?
I would. You've got time for a quick story that just happened last week?
Yes, please.
So I was in Mexico. A colleague and I were interviewing staff, these young folks. If you've ever hired folks from abroad, especially who speak a different language or learning a language, just the amount of courage is just staggering. I mean, we just stay inspired. This young man comes in. He is scared to death. His arms crossed tightly across his chest. We're honestly scared for him, a little bit nervous for him physically, that he's not going to breathe during the interview. And so we interview for a couple of minutes. We realize we don't want to waste this guy's time. He does not have the chops to be a counselor. And so we tell him, hey, let me tell you what's going on. And you're nervous. We did a couple of things to help him breathe. And we said, we're not going to hire you for counselor, and it's not going to work out. Here's a list of other camps. We really want you to be successful. This is a good thing you've done. So he leaves. He comes back, and he wants to interview for another job. And so now this is kind of inspiring us. He wants to interview for a support staff job. And so same thing, though. It doesn't go well. And so we don't hire him. And we send him away with blessings. So I think you need a smaller camp. We think you'll be able to find your voice, and bless him where we can. So that was that. The next day, we're interviewing at a fair in Mexico, and we look at our queue, and this brother is in our line again.
Wow.
And we're going, oh my God, this is great. Number one, we're thinking, wow, our translation must be really bad, because this guy doesn't know that we've said we're not going to hire him. Well, we have one of our family members who's Mexican, and we have him talk to him. And so this time we sit down with my colleague and our brother, Agus, who works for us, and I have him translate everything, because I want to hear this guy's story in Spanish. And he tells me he went home, he watched the video again, we're the place he wants to work. He's calmer, and he's able to get to it. And so now we have this guy. Number one, we got a guy that we think is big-hearted and will give a program. But what kind of resiliency and what kind of beginner's mind and tenacity does this guy have to come back a third time? And so it was a beautiful moment. We had him step back. We talked about it. I talked to Goose, who's Mexican, and said, listen, we don't want to set this guy up. We want to set him up for success. What do you think? We decided to hire him. And so we had this great moment of him coming back in and having to really bless his courage. And I said, this is going to serve you well the rest of your life. It doesn't always mean you're going to get the job, but you always want to have that courage. And then we announced to him that he was indeed going to get the job. Anyway, it was a beautiful thing. And I think that's you mentioned why you don't dismiss anybody. Man, our job as camp directors, I think particularly, is to be growing people. And growing people takes time, it takes patience, and it takes a lot of willingness to be honest and meet folks where they are again and again and again, even if they don't work for us. Some of my best, most influential interviews have been with folks that I have not hired, but I have taken the time to care for and try to get them to a place where they can really grow. So that's just, I think, one of those unwritten things we commit to by working in the camping industry is we don't come across any people that are throwaway people.
Oh, so true. So true. Well, I want to follow up on a couple other things that you've already said. You talked about seeing staff who are getting to camp, realizing things are different, even maybe some of those older campers, and they're experiencing those difficult moments. And I have found through my work with camp professionals that there are a lot of fixers in camp and a lot of problem solvers. But I hear you saying that, we need to be alongside them, walk with them as they go through what's difficult. Can you tell me a little bit more about what do those director moves look like? Like, what is the director doing, saying, feeling in that moment when they have someone struggling, but it's their work to do, not yours?
Well, it is, I will say, I think it's an advanced skill to be able to work with somebody who's struggling and maybe struggling to do a good job and to not over-attach. So there's a really key word, is to not over-attach to any of your staff's journey. It's their journey. They're the ones who are failing. You're not. They're the ones who are struggling. And so you really do have to have a step away from them. And that allows you, since you're not experiencing this pain or this frustration they are, then you can allow them to go to it. It's so tempting to want to just offer another day off or just switch them into something. And some of those are the right moves. But I think the important thing is that you take the time, and that may be a minute, it may be sleeping on it, to figure out what is best for this young man or woman, and what lesson is it? What's your big goal a year from now? I mean, I know there's things you have to fix right there in the moment. You got a 2-week session or whatever your session is. But you also have to think about, what am I trying to pour into this person for the long run? And you fixing it just doesn't do that. In fact, in some ways, classic word here, we start enabling our staff. And typically camp directors are so high energy and so capable that they can make a lot of things happen and they can fix a lot of things. It's just in the long run, number one, I think it breaks all kinds of boundaries. Number two, I don't think it's a long-term helping thing. I don't think it's what you want your culture to be, is when things get tough, the central staff fixes everything. So I think it takes a cultural shift to, we are all going to, I know one of the ways that we talk about it when we have, whatever our problems are, and by problems, I mean staff who are not doing what they're supposed to do, is we talk about it in a group setting and brainstorm it as best we can. And so anybody who's getting over attached, which there's always somebody who is, you're able to go, ooh, you need to take a step back from that, and then walk in with what the best solution may be. I'm not sure that answered that question, but.
No, I think that's really helpful. And part of what I hear you saying out of that is one of the greatest gifts we can give in that moment is our presence, right? And that is especially a hot commodity during the summer, when as camp directors, we have 1,000 things on our mind. And when you have a staff member that really what they need is your undivided attention, it may only be for a minute, but it's rare that I feel like we are able to offer that, or I felt that way when I was directing. And so, yeah, that's really what I hear, is how do we find that presence in the moment? Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, you said that much in a much wiser way than I did. I think you're spot on there, and it's incredibly difficult. It became a laughing thing because camp directors tend to get off on being busy. I know I did for the bulk of my career. Yeah, I am busy, therefore I exist. And it's a bit of a fool's errand after a while. And the old adage of, hey, Dan, can I talk to you? Sure, walk with me. You can only get my attention if I'm doing 3 other things. And wow, that's not what they need. And so to be able to, I think the biggest thing is, and this is going to sound weird, I think to be an effective camp director, you've got to find a way to slow down. That has been a mantra for me over the last couple of years. Slow down. You still have the same amount of responsibilities, but how do you slow this down so you can really be with people? So one thing I'm fond of now is, when somebody wants my attention, if I can't give my full attention, I don't do that. And so I will say, yes, I want to speak to you. Can we do it in 5 minutes? Maybe it's 5 minutes, and go stage left. Leave the dining room table. And if you're going to give them 2 minutes, give them all of your 2 minutes, and be really mindful and conscious of what they're saying. And then, don't give a half effort on it. If you need to think about it, think about it. But once you tell them you're going to think about it, absolutely keep your word and circle back around with them. So, yeah, you have to be really disciplined to be able to give your full attention like that.
Yeah. And I found for me, it's also a matter of really getting some work done on the front end, right? In this off-season time, really trying to make sure we can take care of some of those things that can be taken care of. There are always going to be fires to put out, but there might be some other projects you can knock out now to give yourself that presence when they arise in the moment. So
that's huge. And I will say, yeah, the podcast, Ruby, I think about you and the gifts that you give. I think about Kim Aycock and the gifts she gives in order to be prepared. So you can actually be prepared enough where you're not doing everything on the fly. Trust me, I know all about that. And you can really be present with folks. The preparation is huge.
It is. Well, so another word that you've said a few times that I know we've discussed as a bit of a buzzword right now, and I'll be transparent in that it is a word that I've been thinking a lot about and doing some reflection on in my own life, is boundaries. And, we also talked about potentially talking about camp director boundaries today, and we've steered the conversation in a different direction, but I would love to hear maybe your most recent thoughts on camp directors and boundaries and how we do that at camp.
That's a great question. And there's I guess a sprint masterclass coming up sometime in the spring, just
Yeah,
about
we're going to talk
boundaries.
about it. Don't worry.
Yeah. So I think it starts with taking a hard look at who you want to be in your career. I think that's the first step. Who you hear this word legacy. That's a word that doesn't grab me as much as who do you want to be. And so once you set your course on, whatever those terms are going to be, it may be disciplined, it may be courageous, it may be humble. These are the gifts I'm going to give. Then you've got to build kind of your life's culture around that. And the boundaries are, so the folks that get your attention absolutely get it. And then you have to be okay with not being everything to everyone. And that is, I think that's the biggest thing, is when a camp director or any of us in our lives are trying to be all things to all people. I'm fond of this word. It's a fool's errand. It does not work. And you just end up getting wired and tired. And at that point, you're really, I think in some ways, and I think we all feel it during the summer, for me in our organization, we have 4 different sessions, and there was a term for C-session Dan, because was I wired, and it was tiptoe around me. And finally, once we got that, I learned that, my senior staff would know that, and they'd call me out on it. Whoa, Dan, come on, buddy. I think you want to be given different gifts than that. And so there were some of my boundaries. We have people in our organization that we hold each other accountable, particularly with the senior staff. We know each other well. We do whatever kind of personality traits, whether it's the Enneagram or whatever they happen to be. There's so many of those. We know that about each other. And so we can have some insight where we see folks getting stressed and we try to move them into their best self. So there's one thing. To be able to have a culture where you have some partnerships where folks are going to hold you accountable, that helps you with your boundaries. Because maybe that's too strong, a lot of the time when we're breaking boundaries, it's not a plan. We're unconscious about it. It's, it's a blind spot for us. We're just on autopilot. So the first thing with boundaries is you have to set them, and then you have to have practices in your day. And I mean for a camp director, every single day that's going to support those boundaries. That I'm a morning guy, but I don't think it has to be mornings where you wake up and you go, okay, I understand what my boundaries are. I understand what gifts I'm going to give today. And for us camp directors, there are going to be 4,000. There are going to be 4 dozen things that I have not expected today. That is not going to change my boundaries or the gifts I'm going to give. So I think you have to be proactive. I think you have to make lists and have a few things that you commit to, and you keep those commitments. And I'm going to be a little bit redundant going back to a lot of that work is not getting over-attached to things, not getting over-attached to people, or the program has to be perfect. Those over-attachments to things will just kill all your boundaries, because then you're just serving your attachments. I may have gone way left field on that, Ruby.
No,
but I hope that serves.
That is brilliant. And I think about your use of the word over-attachment. I wish that idea had been planted for me as I was starting out in camp. I knew the word overstimulation when I was coming up through the ranks, but I wish that this is something that had been talked about more. And I'm appreciative that it does seem to be a conversation that's happening more. And as Dan mentioned, he is putting together a camp director boundary course that's going to be running for a few days in March. So if that's something that's interesting to you, you can check out gocamp.pro/masterclasses and keep an eye out for the registration there. We'll have more info coming soon. We're really diving into how we can blend this camp lifestyle that we live and also holding on to those boundaries and preserving us, who we are, and the gifts, as you say, that we want to give to the world and the values we want to center around. So I'm so excited about that course. I'm just really thrilled about it.
I am too. There's been, and this may help, there's been kind of a mantra we work on and we have for the last several years, and I think it really helps with the boundaries, is take it seriously, hold it loosely. And it has that great balance of excellence is absolutely, I mean, if, I know with any of our camps and certainly for our training, how we do things is that, we say this, we're not a whatever camp. We're trying to do things in a particular way. And so it's really important how we do things, and hold it loosely, or you're just gonna get walloped with
So
being
smart.
just way over attached.
Yeah, so smart, so smart. I love that. I have several things written down that I'm like, these are going on my wall that you've said today. So I appreciate that a lot. Well, speaking about that excellence, I'm curious, we're going to kind of segue back into that idea of transitioning your campers to staff. Are there any, maybe like your top 3 critical habits or tactics for when you are bringing campers who are making that transition to staff? When you're helping them make that transition, are there 2 or 3 things that you just feel like you always do or always say or are always helping them with?
Yes. I'll say the first thing is that we always try to be honest with them. And so we don't just say it's going to be the best job in the world. We tell them what the job is. And so we're very, very clear with, the job is going to be demanding. And so we're really clear on that. Another thing that we try to do, by the way, on any of these, you can insert that. We fail as much as we succeed, is we try to have really honest evals, and that we're try to be really good at not only the blessing voice, but the critical voice. And so and it goes right back to honest. And so the staff, we have the saying with our staff is you're always going to know where you stand with the directors, because we're not going to hold anything back from you. And so we try to be really free with the great job. I see it. And let me tell you exactly why that's good. Just pulling away 30 seconds, but we're looking them right in the eye. And then the other challenging thing is to be able to have that critical voice, which is just as helpful. And it's a blessing. It's a blessing in a different way. But to be able to pull aside, we're using Jim today, and say, Jim, that is not it. That is not what we've trained you to do, the way you treated that camper or dismissed him or was sarcastic with him. That behavior needs to change. And without spending the time of having to go back and write something down and, all right, well, I guess I better have to say something positive, then I have to say something critical, the whole Oreo approach. To be able to, we're just being honest, and he learns to trust that. It's a huge part of who we are. And I will say, after training our senior staff, who are just unbelievable young adults, it's something that in a morning meeting, I'll demand most days. All right, before lunch, I want you to have blessed 2 of your staff, and I want you to find your critical voice with 2 of your staff. And they have to be reminded of that, because it's just so hard to engage your peers or anyone, because you're worried about your own ego. And so now, once I get practice with it, again, this is one of those things, I don't think it ever gets easy, but it gets familiar. And the last, that's the goal. People, I'll say that over and over again, because people think, oh, well, once I'll have it, it'll be easy. I've never found camp directing easy. I've never found saying hard things to be easy. But I have found them very familiar, and it's part of who we are in our culture. And we say them because we know it changes things. We say them because we know it's going to be meaningful and powerful. And so folks think that's one of the things. I'll go back again to the hero's journey. It teaches you, as soon as you summit that, that great culmination of the quest. Okay, here comes the next challenge. And so that kind of honesty really helps folks. The other thing with the honesty is folks trust. You get that. Trust and honesty. Those are brothers or sisters, or however you want to look at it. But it's really important. Folks start to trust you. And then I will say, as far as the third thing, is that sense of kindness, humor, to be able to be looking at things with a whole lot of kindness. And, here we are. The Camp I run, we're doing a lot of masculine energy, and we're trying to help guys be wild and know what to do with their wildness. And without kindness, it absolutely is a fail. So those would be 3 things.
Thank you so much for sharing those, because I think that there's a lot of wisdom in all three of those. I have one more question for you, which is, it's clear that you have had guidance and mentoring and a willingness to hear different ideas and look at the way you're doing things and consider if it is what is best serving the population you're working with. Where have you found inspiration and learning around your staff training techniques? What resources do you utilize?
Great question. I will say ACA has been super instrumental for me. I'm inspired every time I go. And so, particularly some particular folks that if you're looking for and they have books to support. Ruby, you're one. I've shared that with you before. I'm always inspired by the way you bring yourself. Kim Aycock is somebody who has inspired me my whole career. Michael Thompson is one, and I will say, and it's not his words. In fact, he may hear this and think I've never heard him speak. But as far as some of what he has trained has really helped me with making room for folks and allowing them to grow. Michael Brandwine, that crazy trainer, has been inspirational for me as well. And then some other, as far as techniques of being able to step back and look at things. Brene Brown, I don't know if you've read her stuff. I think it's brilliant. She has several books and talks. For sure. I look at so many of my trainings and points. I haven't used a lot of those points today, but I think it influences me a whole lot. And I think all of those folks have helped me to take a pause and consider how I do things. So that's all of those. I mean, there have been technique trainings. A lot of that has been ideological for me too.
Cool. Great. Well, is there anything else you want to bring up in our conversation today? There's been so much good wisdom shared today. I'm really appreciative of you joining our podcast today.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to speak with you and to think about this. I think it's a good exercise is to go and, especially as we're kind of preparing for the summer, is to think back on our own transitional stories and where we had big challenges, where there was a big transformational moment, and go ahead and think about, all right, what was the fear that we felt? And how did that fear come out? Did it come out in whining or anger? And who were the people? What was the things that really made a difference? Was it that somebody gave us 30 minutes to just sit? Was it a person invited us to sit at the table with them? Was it I was given more responsibility? And so I think it's really important to know your own story. It gives you a really good reference point, and typically it's humbling. I think all of us know it wasn't because we were the hardest worker, the smartest person that we got to where we were. We needed a lot of help. That's a real humbling reminder to me as folks are transitioning, and I may or may not be getting hooked. And so I think really looking at our own story and not being the single reference point, but being something that draws us to some understanding and some compassion.
Fantastic. Well, we'll let you know how you can get in touch with Dan here in just a moment, but wanted to remind you that we appreciate you listening to our podcast, and that if you want to get involved with our podcast, join the discussion, you can use the hashtag Camp Code on social media. Let us know what topics you'd like for us to discuss, any guests you'd recommend that we talk to, any great leadership training tips that you have to share. We'd love to hear from you. We are all about sharing in this industry. It's one of the reasons that I love it so much. And we also ask that if you have found this podcast to be useful, to please leave a rating and review for us in iTunes or your podcast app of choice. And you can do an iTunes review by going to camphacker.tv/cc_iTunes, or you can tweet your love of the show by going to camphacker.tv/campcodelove. That's all one word. And your feedback really helps keep the show going and helps spread the word about the show. And I want to give a shout out today to MLE19 for her review. We appreciate you taking the time to do that. So again, a big thank you to Dan Davis for joining us today. Dan, will you share with our listeners where they can get in touch with you or find out more about what you do?
Yes, the best way to contact me these days is simple, Dan@rockmont.com. Also, I'll be at if any of you are at the ACA conference, I will be there and would love to talk with anybody if they want to talk about this. And I'll be doing a content on mentoring, developing a mentoring mindset at your camp one of those days at the conference in San Diego. So those are the places to get me.
Beautiful. Well, again, thank you so much. And again, my name is Ruby, and you can reach me at ruby@rubyoutdoors.com. You can follow me on Instagram at rubyoutdoors or on Twitter at rubylyn85. Next week for our next podcast, we'll be getting back on our training schedule, and we'll be doing an episode about culture shock and training international staff. So we look forward to sharing some insights there. And as always, our final segment on each podcast is a best practice for leadership training. And we would love to hear some of your most memorable moments or most effective tips. Please feel free to tell us those using that hashtag camp code to get a shout out on the show. And today I've actually asked Dan to share a best practice. So Dan, what do you have for us today?
Two, I never miss the opportunity to talk about the old school, probably already knows it, the slant, the sit up. We use it all the time. Folks tend to kind of get down in their body and go to sleep. You can watch it happen. And it's such a friendly way to have folks kind of sit up, smile, and take a deep breath. Everybody knows it changes your brain chemistry. The other gift we give is we try to start every single training with a question to be answered. So it helps the trainer, number one. We're trying to do this central thing that we're talking about for this 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and also for the trainee, that there's absolutely an expectation that at the end of this session, they have answered this question. And if not, somebody's let somebody down. And so there's this sense of accountability and responsibility sharing that I think all good trainings have, that there's a partnership that happens. So it starts with a question to answer, and it's not some secret mystery thing. It's really, really clear.
So good. So good. Thank you so much, Dan, for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing some of your wisdom, and really looking forward to all the mentoring that is to come from you as we go forward, and to see hopefully another great successful summer at your camp as well.
Ruby, thanks. What a pleasure.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Stay tuned for our next episode. And from all of us here at Camp Code, thanks for the listening, friends.